My name is David, and I want to thank you for joining me on this second episode of the Closet and Pocket podcast, where I cover everything you can wear on you and carry with you. Now, in the first episode, I made some pretty grand claims about wanting to cover different but related areas in a certain level of detail, and then proceeded to cover one area, which was very important to me, and that was the influence of GQ magazine on my style journey. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to make these claims, I should probably start covering those. And I figured, well, no better place to do that than episode 2 now. And I want to do that in a little bit of a different way. So I'm in a fortunate position where I can purchase products on a regular basis, right? And so I thought, why not cover some of my thoughts concerning those purchases and the rationale behind them. So these products that I'm going to cover, I've bought all of them. And rather than going into in-depth reviews for these, because there are sites that do that very well, I thought I would obviously give you some of the specifications for these, right? But rather than spending time purely on specifications or design details, really go into why I was interested in the product in the first place, what I was thinking about before I made the purchase decision, and then ultimately why I decided to purchase it. And then, of course, my thoughts so far in terms of how it's been living with those products. So the goal really is not to provide in-depth reviews, but rather just some overarching discussion. Of course, go into some detail where it's necessary, but go into more of the thought process behind those purchases. Now, related to that, obviously, as I was doing cross-shopping, there's obviously some products that caught my attention, but I didn't buy them at the time for any reason, for any sort of particular reason. And so what I'd like to do is touch on those. And obviously, if I do purchase those will then be subject matter for following episodes. Now, I should mention that you can be certain that if I've bought the product, it's of good quality. And I've bought all of these products. No one has sent these to me. There's no promotional consideration being granted in exchange for me using the products. And so I've bought them all. And because of that, I've researched them, put my money where my mouth is, and these are all great products. Now, I say that because there's a chance that there will be some affiliate links to some of the products that I mentioned. And if you do purchase through those links, you will be helping to support the show. Again, though, there's no impartiality here. There's no conflict of interest. I just want to point you to the direction of some great stuff that I've been able to acquire. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to break the show up into 2, maybe call it 3 pieces. The first one I'll cover is watches. And so I'll talk about 2 watch purchases in particular that I've made in the past, call it 6 months. Then we'll move on to EDC, where I'll cover multi-tools. And then I'll look at card cases and wallets in the third and final section. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. Now, before I cover watches, or the 2 watches in particular I want to talk about today, I think it's probably useful for me to explain my philosophy on watch collecting and watch purchases. Now, I've been interested in watches for going on 10 years now. And even though it's taken some time to really understand what it is I like and what I'm comfortable buying, I think I've got a very defined philosophy. And explaining that now will, I think, shed some light on why I made the 2 subsequent purchase decisions that I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. So when it comes to watch purchasing, I'm lucky that I can go up to a certain level and not really think too much about it. Zero, a couple $100 to $1,000, I'm okay. Even if at $1,000, I'm taking a couple deep breaths. I'm fortunate that I can still go ahead and make that purchase more or less whenever something really neat comes my way. When it comes to the big purchases, though, that tends to be a once-a-year thing. So I'll get the itch once a year to buy one new watch. And once I scratch that itch, I'll say, okay, that's it. And when I say that's it, what I mean is that I'll do my best to swear off watch content. I might just satisfy the need for something new by buying something still cool, but a little bit cheaper. And I just have to hope that tides me over until the itch comes again the next year. The second thing is that my tastes tend to veer towards the different. I told you just a second ago that the way I sort of scratch the itch is buying something that's of lesser value, but I only mean that in terms of a lower cost, because in the watch world, it is really, really tempting to think that, it's only worth something if it's a Rolex Daytona or a Patek Philippe Nautilus, or just generally that it costs a bunch of money. But that's really not the case. what I have found most enjoyment in is really hunting down the value plays that give me the most horological bang for the buck for my money. And I think I can illustrate that actually with two examples that are currently in my collection. Those are the Tudor North Flag, which gets really almost no love from anyone, but it's a fantastic watch, and the Pékinier Royal, which is also a phenomenal watch from a brand that probably almost no one has heard of, but within their respective categories, they're excellent. And if I could just sort of specify in terms of my preferences, so it's not just what's hot now, or I'm sorry, it's not what's horologically significant versus what's hot now. It's really in the realm of steel sport watches. So I have the most fun, I think, getting the most bang for my buck in the steel sports watch segment. So having teed those two things up, right, which is that I tend to resist making large watch purchases, but when I do, I like getting value in the steel watch segment. I'd like to lay out the first purchase I want to talk about today, and that's from a brand called Ultramarine, and the model name is Morse. So this is the Ultramarine Morse, and here's how that purchase came about. So late last year, I was absent-mindedly browsing the Watch Time app. And if you don't know what the Watch Time app is, it's basically a content aggregator. It's an app that you open, it'll have stories from very well-known blogs such as Hodinkee, but then some lesser-known blogs such as Monochrome or Deployant or Watches by SJX. This was a bad idea. I told you earlier that once I scratch the watch itch, I really try and stay away from watch media. But the truth is, I really, really enjoy it. And for every 99 articles, for every one article that makes me want to buy something, there's 99 I just find really interesting. And so it's very hard to deprive myself just of reading the material. But on this day in November, there was a press release for a new watch from a new micro brand, and this was from Ultramarine. I saw the picture and I was hooked. Most micro brands have, I don't want to say a similar design DNA, because a lot of them are trying different things. And so that's a great thing. They can take risks and they can do something different. But I would say that for the most part, you get a lot of fashion watches. The designs are derivative, and there's little horological value there. I mean, they're using Japanese movements, sometimes Chinese movements, occasionally Swiss movements, but these tend to be sort of standard ETA. This particular picture of the Ultramarine Morse caught my attention immediately for the following reasons. So it had an extremely unique look. The dial, the hands, the font used, even the logo, which is supposed to represent an albatross that you can see from the top with its wings outstretched, and over a blue dial that's supposed to evoke the bird flying over the ocean. So just really eye-catching design. And you could feel at the time that there was a brand identity there and that was forming, if not totally formed. So just really, really interesting design right off the bat from the picture. When I started delving into it, I could see that this was a really, really interesting watch from a horological point of view. So the first thing was that rather than opting for an ETA movement, this was the Eterna caliber 39. And on top of that, there was a GMT complication. So rather than just using the standard ETA 2893, the creator of this brand, his name is Lionel, opted for the 3914A, I believe it was. So the Eterna movement with this GMT complication. Then I read further and got to know the sort of brand philosophy behind the design of the watch. And the first thing that really caught my attention was the emphasis on having something that was entirely Swiss made. Now, I don't want to go into the details here, but when you see Swiss made on a dial, there's actually a lot of wiggle room that watch companies can maneuver in to be able to put Swiss made on the dial. So only a certain percentage has to be made in Switzerland. Sometimes it can be assembled in Switzerland and still be Swiss made, even though parts are coming from elsewhere. And so for a consumer who doesn't really know anything, fine. I mean, what you don't know doesn't hurt you. But as someone who understands the business, to me, this always felt like I was not necessarily being shortchanged, but that someone could come in and do better. So Lionel decided to go ahead and do that. And under the overarching philosophy of being transparent, he has come up with a designation on his watch, which is not, it doesn't say Swiss made at the bottom of the dial. It actually says IOES, which stands for the French phrase intégralement œuvré en Suisse, which means completely made in Switzerland. So I was very much on board with this. On top of that, again, under the theme of transparency, he wants and wanted to be totally transparent with the suppliers, and then totally transparent with the margin and pricing. So what you had on offer was a watch that was really unique looking, of horological significance, made entirely in Switzerland with a clear margin, and for a price that was offered on pre-order. I think it was about $1,500 and $200 more than that if you came in at a certain point in the pre-order process. So of the run of 300, I think it might have been the first 20 were at pre-order, first 100, something like that. But I ended up getting the pre-order pricing. I can tell you that at the time, I had just made my big watch purchase for the year, and I was not entirely certain about doing this. But then I also said, I feel something for this watch. It is a limited run. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get my hands on this on the pre-owned market, and so I should just go ahead and make the jump. I said there was a blue dial, that was the default. I think there was also a more limited run of black dials being made, but because of the logo, again, the significance of the bird flying over the ocean, I just felt like this was meant to be experienced in blue. I love blue watches, so I took the plunge and went ahead and bought the watch. So that was in November, and a couple of months later, I believe it was in March or April, I finally received it. And my quick verdict on this is that I am really, really satisfied with this. The build quality is phenomenal. The watch came in a nice box. So there wasn't obviously any huge amount of extraneous packaging because this is still basically a one-man operation as I understand it. But just a really well put together package. There was a warranty card. There is support from the watch manufacturer if something were to happen to it. Looks really nice, very well made, takes a bunch of different straps. So overall, I'm just extremely happy with this. I'm also really happy that because of that success, Lionel is going to be releasing 3-hand models, so both date and no date. I'm very excited for the date version. But overall, just a great, great package. I'll go ahead and post the link to Ultramarine in the show notes, and I would love for you to go ahead and check them out. Of course, again, I'm not getting anything for you purchasing from here, but I think if you're interested in watches and you want a good value, or if you found this show, you don't know too much about watches, you want something nice and you want something different, I'm telling you, you're going to be the only one having this watch, so do go check them out. Now, the second watch I want to talk about is a much more well-known brand, but I also think that it might be more unconventional than what most people would be looking at buying. And that's the Omega Seamaster 300M. Now, before I go into my purchase of the Omega Seamaster 300M, it's worth mentioning the other watch, so the big 2018 watch. This is how I scratched my itch then. Well, the 2018 watch for me was also an Omega. I wanted to celebrate a new job, a new beginning, and again, I am always most interested in sporty watches that deliver a ton of value. And after a lot of research and thinking about what my collection was missing, and it was a chronograph at the time, I ended up on the Omega Seamaster Aquaterra Chronograph GMT. It's a big mouthful, but it tells you everything that is in that watch. It's got a chronograph, it's got a GMT complication, it's got 150 meters water resistance, which you rarely see on these types of complicated watches. And even though it wasn't cheap, it was just an incredible value on the gray market. I got it for half price from the boutique price. And the thing is, I don't think that this watch gets a lot of attention because, it's in the shadow of Rolex and Patek Philippe first. So I think Omega generally doesn't get a lot of love. But this one, because it is relatively large, I think turns a lot of people off. And I think that their loss is my gain here because it was just a great watch. And that certainly influenced my watch purchase from 2019, which was the Seamaster 300M. And here's how I arrived at that. So 2019 rolls around. I think I'd been pretty good about sticking to my 1 year condition for big watch purchases. And over the course of the year since I bought the Aquaterra chronograph GMT, I've always got a running list of what watches I'd like to buy. And I'm sure that if you're into watches as I am, you're always doing the same thing. You're browsing the watch forums, you're looking at Chrono24, and you're just keeping track of the things that you'd like to own. And in keeping with my philosophy of the most bang for the buck possible, my list was looking pretty eclectic. I had the Tag Autavia on there, which was newly announced for 2019, and I knew I was going to be able to get a great deal on the gray market if I went with that. The Chopard LUC, also hugely overlooked compared to the more traditional offerings from Patek Philippe, but just incredible value for what it is. But the thing with those watches and some of the others on my list was that I don't know that they were quite sporty enough for me. I like dress watches. The Pekini I mentioned at the beginning of the show is a dress watch. But the trouble is that I just don't find them very versatile. And so for that reason, I always tend to have a preference for dive watches. So pretty quickly, it came to mind that I should buy a dive watch this year. And especially, because it's my 35th birthday, maybe I could tie that in and maybe do a little bit of a bigger dive watch than what I usually do. So I should mention that with regards to dive watches, I've got some experience with the Rolex Submariner, right? And if you talk nice dive watches, you have to try the Sub. I've got a long-term Submariner 16610 on loan to my brother, and I've also owned a 116613, so that's the current generation two-tone bluesy with the blue dial from Rolex. But unfortunately, it felt strange wearing that much gold, and I ended up trading it in. Even though it was a beautiful, beautiful watch, I just didn't think it was quite my style in terms of what I preferred to wear. So I've had experience with the Submariner, and that meant that when I was looking to buy a dive watch, it sort of cuts down your options a little bit, because if you're saying you want something above a Seiko, or maybe even above an Oris, not taking anything away from Oris, but if you've done the Sub and you want to do something a little bit nicer than those two other brands, it doesn't leave you with a lot of choice. And I would argue that really the only choice, and I know that's kind of a loaded term and I use it loosely, but the only choice really is an Omega dive watch, either the Aquaterra or the 300M. Now the Aquaterra, I figured, okay, I've already got the chronograph, and people sort of say, well, they're too thick. I mean, that didn't really bother me because of, again, the chronograph purchase, but it felt like the Aquaterra was going to be out of the running pretty quickly. And that left 300M. Now, with regards to the 300M, I've got a very conflicted history. So the 300M was released in 1993 and pretty quickly became known as the Bond watch. So Pierce Brosnan wore it in one of the Bond films, and he wore, I think it was the blue quartz version. And so since then, it's been known as Omega's Bond watch. And I think you could make the case that along with the Speedmaster, it's one of the company's few real design icons. Here's the thing, though. I strongly disliked that watch. To me, it always screamed 90s. I felt like the design, even though it was noticeable, just felt kind of loose and never really coalesced into anything. And the bracelet in particular just felt incredibly busy and, again, just screamed 90s to me. So the watch was always on my radar. I was aware of it, but was never, ever anything that I truly wanted to actually buy. So fast forward 25 years to Basel 2018, and to mark the quarter-century occasion of this watch being released, Omega went ahead and revamped the entire collection. I think they offered 14 different variants at the time. They sort of tightened up the design. They put a new movement in. And it was a big deal. I mean, that was one of the most talked about new releases at Basel. And on top of that, with all of these new improvements, they kept the price below $5,000, which for that amount of watch that you're getting, and again, compared to the Rolex Submariner, presented a lot of value. So for the watch press, this was a big deal. And I remember reading the article and thinking, yeah, it looks pretty good. But at the same time, I just could never see myself freeing up the funds to go ahead and buy it. So in the summer of 2019, I ended up in Frankfurt Airport and saw the watch in a boutique finally. And I was completely smitten. It looked just totally different from all of the previous Seamaster 300Ms I'd seen in the wild, and just looked like a really, really tough, beautiful, well-made, modern dive watch. So I did some further research on it and found out that, Omega caliber 8800, obviously the coaxial movement, almost amagnetic properties, and I had some experience with these coaxial calibers from the chronograph GMT. Really liked it. So the movement was great. Also, the ceramic laser etched wave dial that everyone talked about looked super, super sharp. The proportions generally were great. And then maybe more trivially, the introduction of the rubber strap on an official basis was really welcome, because if you look at the Rolex Submariner, not to take away from the Oyster bracelet, because that is the standard. It's really well done. It's a part of the watches, but sometimes you want to try something different. And even though there are aftermarket strap options for the Submariner, it just feels weird. And so to have a company come out and say, yes, you should wear rubber straps with this watch, and we're going to offer them to you, was just really, really refreshing. So I was sold at this point. And my wife, being very understanding, said, you work hard. It's your 35th birthday. You should go for it. So I bought it on the gray market, got a phenomenal deal. I think I paid $3,700, so about almost 25% less than what the list price was. And it's just so much watch for the money. The Rolex Sub is a great watch, nothing to take away from it. But when you look at just how much watch you get with the Omega Seamaster 300M for less than $4,000, it's just a fantastic, fantastic buy. In fact, I opted for the blue version because I like blue watches, but the black version looks really, really sharp. I think it would look excellent with like a gray or a green strap. I don't think those would go so well with the blue, so I'm almost thinking that for my next watch next year, I may just go ahead and get the version in black as well. I mean, that's how strongly I feel about this particular watch. It's just excellent, excellent value. It's one of my favorites, and I'm just so glad I made this purchase. Before I move on to the next sort of segment of the show, just a couple notes to close this off. If you are looking at this watch and you're on the fence, the first one is either to buy pre-owned or buy on the gray market. It's unfortunate that Omega does suffer so much on resale, and there's so much excess inventory out there, but their loss is the consumer's gain, and just phenomenal bargains to be had out there. Also, the advice usually tends to be stick to the bracelet or buy the bracelet because of the fact that the upcharge is only $100 if you buy the bracelet version over the rubber strap, but to buy the bracelet separately would probably be closer to $1,000. Having said that, I disliked the look of the bracelet still, even in a new update. And even though everyone says it's the most comfortable, one of the most comfortable bracelets they've ever worn, I just didn't like the look. And I knew that even if I bought the bracelet, I would have to spend a couple $100 anyways to buy the rubber strap from Omega directly. And then on top of that, I also saw that on the comments and reviews I was reading, there seemed to be a lot of preference for the rubber strap version anyways. So I said, if I ever have to resell this watch, I don't know that I'm going to take much of a hit at all, given the rubber strap configuration. And finally, I would recommend sticking with stainless steel rather than two-tone. You'll save a lot of money. I think the two-tone, even though it's nice, doesn't look quite as well executed on, and I don't mean execution in terms of having it been manufactured a certain way, but more just the design doesn't play as well with the two-tone as the Rolex Bluesy does. And then finally, it's a tool watch, and even though totally upfront with you, I will probably never dive with this, and frankly, most people won't dive with it either. It's still meant to be a tool watch, and so just sticking with the tool watch ethos of the Omega Seamaster 300M, I just felt, well, let's go ahead and just stick with the stainless steel model, and I've been very, very happy with that. So if you are at all on the fence about buying this watch, don't be. It's great. If you're looking to spend a little bit of money, or a little bit more money than you're used to on a watch that could be your only watch, then go ahead and do it. It's just excellent, excellent purchase. Okay, so having spent that time on watches, I want to move more towards specific EDC items. Now, of course, a watch is part of many people's EDC, but I want to go back to things that are strictly EDC in the sense that you actually have to carry them on you. And I want to talk about pocket knives, really multi-tools generally. So the EDC term is relatively recent, and you're going to find over the course of these shows that I enjoy going to New York Times to see when the first mention of it or of any particular term was made. And with EDC, it was relatively new. But I mean, let's be honest, like EDC is perhaps a new-ish term, but guys have been carrying things around for far longer than the life of the term EDC. I've always been interested in wallets and watches, but because of this new umbrella term of EDC, it's been able to open up a whole new world of things that other people carry. So it's not just about wallets and watches anymore. It's about cool gear generally. And one of the things I noticed within the EDC community was that a lot of people were always talking about carrying around knives and how a knife would be the most indispensable tool that you would have in your EDC arsenal. You'd use it at least 5 times a day was the quote that came up a lot. Well, I'll be honest, personally, I think they're lying. Unless you work in the field, and I have worked in the field before, it just seemed like such a stretch to say that you would use a knife that many times a day. And in fact, I've done some informal polling around the office, and a lot of guys will tell me, yeah, that's a total crock crap. I just don't need a knife that often. Having said that, GQ, so we're going back to GQ, published a piece relatively recently on what little pocket knife you should keep in the fifth pocket of your jeans. I'll link to the article in the show notes and would be curious to hear what your reaction is to that. But my reaction was, well, I mean, they're right. I don't use the fifth pocket of my jeans very much, and it's not going to cost me anything to carry something so small. So yeah, why not just go ahead and try this out? The trouble was that these small knives were still basically just blades. And I would have been fooling myself if I thought, well, on one hand, that I think this is a totally useless thing, and on the other hand, I'm going to carry it around in my pocket. So I said, okay, it's got to have something more than just a knife, or maybe like a little piece at the end you can pry stuff with. And so I went back to a classic, and it's so classic that it's actually in the name, the Victorinox Classic SD. It is super, super cheap. It's like maybe $15 through Amazon Prime. You can get all kinds of different colors. I got the classic red. But it's just a phenomenal, phenomenal tool. I mean, it's got the knife, obviously. It's also got a pair of scissors. It's got a multi-tool that basically serves as nail file, small screwdriver, and pry bar. And then it's got the sort of almost iconic toothpick and tweezers. And on top of all of that, unlike carrying around a knife, it's completely inoffensive to everyone. I mean, small, everyone knows exactly what it is. It's just a great piece of kit. I love it. If you look at the greater EDC community, though, I think that Swiss Army knives are, in a way, a victim of their own success. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that if you think back to a lot of our childhoods, we probably all got Swiss Army knives. And this was a big moment for us. And unfortunately, because we got them as kids, you know, when you move on as an adult, your tastes change, you've got some more disposable income. And I think that a lot of people tend to view Swiss Army knives to an extent as a little bit childish. They're sort of seen as toys. And that doesn't help, right? The first thing is that they definitely don't have the tactical, and I want to differentiate that from tactical. It's tactical look that a lot of people really enjoy. So black scales, you know, carbon fiber, quick flick, mechanism, micarta scales. I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like the Swiss Army knife is the Swiss Army knife. And I would put it more in the category of gentleman's knives rather than any sort of military or utility knife, even though they are issued to soldiers, right? But the ones I'm talking about don't have this tactical look. And finally, the third reason is that there probably are better knives. I mean, I don't want to get into the metallurgy of all this, but it's probably true, and I'm not going to argue this because, yeah, it's probably true that in terms of knife material, there's probably just better blades out there. So from Benchmade or Sebenzo, or I mean, pick any manufacturer, and that's okay. I mean, even though I don't particularly see knives as useful during the day, I totally understand that for some people that is their thing. They want the best knife they can get. They want to carry around something they feel good about, and so you're going to gravitate automatically towards whoever makes the best knife. And I totally understand that. And so for those three reasons, I just think that Victorinox doesn't get a lot of respect amongst the EDC brands. But for me, I love them. So I've got the Victorinox SD Classic that's with me all the time, whether I'm in the office or out. And if I'm at home, I tend to favor the Victorinox Climber with the nylon scales. Beautiful knife, does everything I need it to. No slip grip. It's just a great, great tool. But I still wanted to experiment. And one thing in particular that caught my attention was when Leatherman announced the free line of tools earlier in the year. So if you've never ever handled a multi-tool before, you know that the tools are all removed with nail notches. So they all have notches. You put your nail in it, you pull up, and that's how you get the tool out. Leatherman has been in the multi-tool business for decades. They know exactly what they're doing, and they wanted to push the envelope. And so they came up with a system that uses magnets to store the tools. And so the way it works is that rather than having a nail notch, there's basically bumps at the end of each tool, and you'll roll your finger over them, and the tools will smoothly come out. There's a mechanical lock, so they'll lock into place, and then you can put them back for easy. So it's basically one-hand operation. Now, I knew I wouldn't have any need for the P4 version, which has the pliers that Leatherman is known for. But I did want to go ahead and give the T4 a shot because that looked like more in line with the type of size that I wanted to carry around. So I ordered the tool. It was $60 through Amazon. And my impressions were that it's not a bad tool. In fact, it's an extremely good tool. It's very well made. There's a weight to it that just transmits quality as soon as you pick it up in your hand. But the proportions for office carry, I find, are just too big. And then it's also just not as sleek looking as the Victorinox. So from an office carry point of view, all the things that would make this the ideal tool for being in the field. So it's the rugged looks, the metal construction, the pocket clip, all of these things don't make it very well suited, I believe, for carrying around every single day. I do continue to think that for everyday use, the SAK, or the Swiss Army knife, the SAK, has the most winning combination of looks, practicality, and non-threatening character. And that is something that really shouldn't be brushed over. It's a completely inoffensive tool that everyone knows, and there's no worry at all about carrying one around. So, in summary on that, if you want the Leatherman, buy it. Fantastic tool, but just be aware of the situations you're going to carry it around in. I think a final note, though, on the topic in terms of things I'm looking to acquire. If you want the sleekness of the Swiss Army knife and maybe not the burliness of the Leatherman, the ALOX tools from Victorinox should be a really great option. So I've got the ALOX Victorinox Classic SD, but unfortunately it loses the tweezers and toothpicks. So I don't carry that tool around very much. But I do have my eye on the ALOX Pioneer X. So that gets you a greater size. It gets you the sleekness and the lightness of the aluminum construction. And then I figure if I pair that with my Victorinox Classic X SD, I'll have something that's got a ton of utility in it, but a very nice, sleek-looking package. So I guess, yeah, to close this section, love my Victorinox, love the Leatherman, but I wouldn't say that I'm as happy with the Leatherman purchase as I was with the Omega Seamaster 300M. It's a satisfaction, but I don't know that the cost per use is going to be as low on that one as on my watch or my Victorinox. So let's move on to the last topic, and this is one of wallets. I've got two interesting purchases here I want to share with you guys, both very different, but both should be worthy of consideration, I think, in your everyday carries. So I should start with my philosophy on wallets. I told you what my view on watches was. Well, I've got pretty strong views on how I think a wallet should carry. It summarizes pretty simply, and that's basically that I don't carry bifolds. I carried a bifold in the sort of nether years of my style journey. This was right out of college. It was cheap. It accumulated receipts and garbage cards, and it was just awful. The form factor is not conducive to being in your pocket. It's squat. It's kind of like stubby, like very square. It is just not at all my thing. And I completely understand that some people want to carry cash, but to me, I would rather just put a couple bills in the small pocket of a card case and just be on my way. So card cases, that is my sweet spot. I love card cases. And the nice thing about card cases is that not only do they encourage you to carry much slimmer, they're also just a lot cheaper than bifold wallets. And because they're much cheaper, it's relatively easy for me to just on an impulse add a new card case to my collection. So I'll buy one, use it for a while, and then if something else comes along, I'll just put the old one in the closet, and I'll just rotate in and out as I feel I want to. So back in 2012, my wife and I were in Austin, and we visited a men's store called Stag. Stag has grown quite a bit since then. They sell some offbeat men's brands, but it's kind of like more of a hipster store than I would say like a high fashion area. But they have some really nice things, and it was just fun. I remember discovering the brands they were carrying, and one of them was by a company called Il Bussetto. It's based out of Italy. And I was just really, well, both of us actually were both just really taken by how slim the wallet was, how smooth the leather was, the richness of the color that was there. And so my wife ended up buying a brown Il Bussetto card case. She used it for a few years. It went to the back of the closet, and that's where it stayed for quite some time. A few months ago, I was looking for something different, and I was going back to my closet, and I found this Il Bussetto card case. It had accumulated in the time that had been used, a really, really nice patina. It just had a shine to it still, in addition to some wear marks, which just made the whole package that much more beautiful. So I said, I'm gonna try this. And man, it was just a really, really nice experience being able to pull this in and out every time I needed to reach for my cards or, take out a little bit of cash. And so that renewed experience with Il Bussetto one day just sort of prompted me to do a Google search for the brand. And it turned out that Bloomingdale's was having a 50% off clearance on Il Bussetto items that would apply to some of the items I was interested in. And one of those was a vertical fold wallet. And I know that I'm cheating a little bit here because it is technically a bifold, but the aspect ratio is completely different. And so even though it's a little bulkier than what I like, I do enjoy the fact that you have a nice big piece of leather to look at and handle, but you still get some of the sleekness that you get with a card case. And so I picked up in brown one of these Il Bussetto vertical wallets for $30. So it was $100 new. It was down to something like $60 with the sale price, and then it was another 50% off with the discount. And then I signed up to be on their mailing list. I got free shipping. So for $30, I picked up this really, really handsome Il Bussetto vertical fold wallet. So I'll post a link to it in the show notes so you can take a look at it. Overall, my impressions are really, really good. Unfortunately, it's made in Thailand. I was under the impression that all the products were made in Italy. But at the same time, that would have bothered me more at $100 than at $30. I think at $30, it's fine. And honestly, we all, and me certainly, right, because of this discussion I just had earlier about the Made in Switzerland watch, I think maybe I do tend to get caught up a little bit too much in terms of where things actually originate from. I do tell myself I should focus on the quality more, just the inherent quality. And this definitely has that. The leather is really nice. There's a really nice contrast between the outside brown pockets and the inside beige pockets. There are slit pockets, which you don't see a lot. So overall, just a really, really nice package. Il Bussetto as a whole also makes really beautiful watch straps. They have some really nice looking accessories. So I think this is going to end up being something that I explore further in the future. As it turned out, though, it did not last very long in the rotation. And that leads us to my last purchase I want to talk about today. And that is a card case from a brand called Smathers and Branson. Now, if you haven't heard of Smathers and Branson, you're exactly where I was just about 6 weeks ago. So thanks to the Facebook and Instagram algorithm, a couple months back, a brand called La Matera showed up on my feed. And La Matera sells Argentinian-inspired leather goods, and I even think that they're actually made in Argentina. And these are really, really beautiful. It's basically the application of a needlepoint, I would imagine, indigenous to Argentina pattern on leather goods, right? So it's a very different twist on needlepoint. So I know that within South America, there's a lot of different variations of it, but I think this was meant to evoke. Argentina was meant to evoke the sort of, artisanal culture over there, and also just capture, I think, what the creators thought Argentinian style was, right? And I was taken by this. Now, of course, I have no sort of tie to the country, but it is a beautiful, beautiful pattern. Unfortunately, it's not cheap. And having said that, it's probably justified because of the fact that, the craftsmanship definitely looks like it's there. But it's not very cheap. And on top of that, they did not have card cases, only bifold wallets. So right off the bat, even though I love the design, I just couldn't justify spending that much money on something that wasn't really going to end up in my pocket. So then the algorithm struck again, and they presented me with a brand called Smathers and Branson. Now, Smathers and Branson is closer to home. They're based out of the U.S., and they have the same needlepoint sort of design language, but it's coming at it from a very different point of view. So rather than presenting this as part of cultural heritage, it's presented as like heritage preppy. Now I understand that's also a certain heritage, but not in the strictest sense as you would with La Matera. But it's presented in a very preppy kind of way, and because of that, the designs that are presented are right into that aesthetic. So you have collegiate licenses, which makes total sense in terms of like a trad preppy aesthetic. But you also see things like lobsters and nautical flags. But you also see certain things that are a little bit subversive. So Jolly Rogers, for example. And this whole aesthetic really drew me in. I said, okay, this is definitely a brand I'm interested in finding out more about. So thanks, Facebook and Instagram, for getting me in on the algorithm. But I also remember thinking, okay, if they have all of these preppy designs, surely there's got to be something somewhat close to what La Matera was offering in a card case. And lo and behold, there it was. I was extremely happy to see it. So this was the Gaucho Rojo needlepoint card case. It had almost the exact same design that I was looking at in La Matera, but it was in a card case format. It was much cheaper. So I signed up to the mailing list, and I think I got 10% off, making the price about $50. And for that price, I received a very well made, very well good looking card case. It was made in Vietnam, but again, without getting hung up on the origins, the quality is definitely there. And what I like about the colors is that it's got a mix of blues and reds and kind of cream tones, which I like generally, but it's got this very nice sort of aged aesthetic to it. So when you look at it, even right out of the box, it's not a brand new thing. It looks like something that has already aged and will continue to age the more I use it. Now, unlike the El Bussetto wallet, this has been in my pocket constantly since I got it about 3 weeks ago. I am extremely happy with it. And given the price, I think I'll be back for more from Smathers and Branson. I don't think I'll be carrying around a lobster and needlepoint card case in my pocket, but certainly some of the other designs I'll be taking a look at. And if La Matera ever decides to offer card cases, I'll be happy to buy one from them and report back to you guys on my experience from that particular brand as well. So this has been a long episode. I hope you found it interesting and informative. I would love to hear your feedback, either by you leaving a review wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, or you can always contact me directly. The email address for that is closetandpocket@gmail.com. That's exactly how you'd expect it to be spelled. No underscores, no dashes, no dots. Just closetandpocket@gmail.com. The other thing, too, is that this is now the second episode. Hopefully you've gotten a good feel for what the content of the podcast is going to be. If you would like to be interviewed on the show, or you think you have something to share, you can imagine that doing these alone is quite tough. And so I'd love to have some guests off of whom I can bounce some ideas and trade some thoughts. So do feel free to contact me with any kinds of requests or submissions if that's something you're interested in doing. So with that, I want to thank you guys very much for joining me here on episode 2, and I look very much forward to talking to you again in episode 3.